Hey everybody, it's Thursday.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Night Bite.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily. And tonight we don't really have a plan, other than talking ice fishing. So sometimes we bring you guests and people and products and things and all kinds of stuff. And sometimes we just talk fishing. And I think tonight is one of those nights.
Yeah, we're just going to sit here and chit chat for a little while. And the more questions or comments or crazy stories you guys have, the longer we'll talk. So, we're just here to chat a little bit. Leave anything in the comment section. We'll get to it. We'll put it up on the screen. Let's, I guess, start last weekend, huh?
Go for it.
So I guess last weekend we did pretty all right. I feel like, we kind of, I wouldn't say fished memories so much as just kind of off a gut instinct. We were on some fish later in the fall.
Okay, that's a better way to put it. It's not memory and it's not gut instinct because you're making a good point. I'm supporting you. It doesn't sound like it, but because we always tell
famous
people,
last words.
No, we always tell people, going into ice season, what are the things that you look for, right? How do you prepare for ice season? And now it's here. So if you didn't do these things, that's okay. But if you did, one of the things that we mentioned is like, notice where the fish are late fall going into ice, because like what we did, we stayed on open water right until ice season. And I do not expect people to do that. It is a little bit hectic. It is a little bit crazy, right? But the reason that we came back to this spot is because that's exactly where we left them weeks ago.
Yeah.
With chosen stuff. It feels a lot longer ago. Like it feels like forever ago. But honestly, that was just a few weeks, right? That was recent.
Yeah, it was pretty, it's like a month ago, like just like Emily said, like 4 weeks ago. Just left those fish right out there, and we just kind of decided, hey, that's a great starting point. We knew they were there. They were there in good numbers. Let's just check there because they couldn't have gone far, right? And we just happened to be lucky enough that they really hadn't moved at all. And so the only thing I would say is that maybe I think some of the size changed from when we were there in the fall. Like I think some of the smaller fish were still in that central area that we were fishing in. And I feel like if we would have been able, like physically able to move around a little bit more, with the weather and how cold it was not really conducive to hole hopping. But if we had been able to do that a little bit more, I think we could have put ourselves on a little bit like bigger fish. But as far as like numbers and just the general population of fish, I feel like we did a pretty good job.
Well, and so I guess that's an interesting point is we should, I guess, round out the fishing report. We were fishing 10 to 13 feet of water. Is that fair? I guess 10 is a little bit
I would say 12
to
15. Yeah.
But that is the thing is we were jigging a larger amount of the bottom than like just the bottom. Sometimes people imagine that you have to peel every fish right off the bottom. Watch your Vexlar, watch them come up. But we found that sometimes the higher up that we jigged was the more that the fish were coming in. So it's pretty clear water out there, isn't it? Like they must be seeing it and coming in.
Yeah, I think most of it was.
Oh my gosh. Tea with honey and lemon tonight is so exciting.
Flip it around. Flip it around. Let them see the other side.
Okay, it's because when we got married, we got like his and hers mugs, but one said beauty and one said beast, and I'm using the beast mugs.
So I think part of what you were just saying, the higher up you jigged, the little bit more action you got. I think what we were seeing there was just fish roaming flats, right? And so the higher up and the water was clear enough, I think fish could see it from a little bit further away, and you would get like a small pack of fish, but then all of a sudden like one or two nicer marks would come in, and usually those would be the ones to eat. At least the ones that I saw, like the smaller fish tended to just be like, oh, what is that? And then the bigger fish were like, oh, I'm going to eat that first.
Mm-hmm. But there was a ceiling, there was a top to this trick, right? Because if you started to go too high into the water column, you did not get those fish coming in like what Josh is describing. So, it was an interesting day because you got to kind of play around with that. And I threw
Hey,
a
Gene.
ton of jigs, a ton of plastics, a ton of everything down there. And ultimately, what I remembered is in summer, these fish liked chartreuse. And I went with that. And I think, is that what you even ended up going with?
I ended up using that. I used white quite a bit. I actually had a pretty decent pike bite me off on some white. But so I was using the 3mm. I started out with a 3mm tungsten from Widowmaker, the disco ball in black, and just a little white mousy plastic. I couldn't even tell you what make it was. And honestly, like even that small of a jig, you can pound the bottom with that and still get enough like poofing, especially if you're on a soft bottom area, that it does attract fish. So that's what I was doing initially, was I was just like dive bombing that tiny little jig into the bottom and then popping it up and just like jiggling it around and then pounding it in the bottom until a fish would show up, right? And I don't know if that was actually attracting fish or just biding time, entertaining me until fish came. But I think it did have something to do with it. And then after a while, I just kind of stopped doing it and just started jigging up. And I think it worked about the same. So I think it's just more getting fish's attention while they're roaming around.
Well, and roaming around was a big key to that because we did see these fish just come and go and come and go and come and go. But to chase these fish would have been literally exhausting. Like, could we have done it? I don't even know if we could have kept up, to be honest. But we were sure trying. And so we have Troy asking, we're using a camera, forward-facing sonar, flasher. And I guess my answer is
Yes.
yes. And the reason for that is because we were using the forward-facing sonar to kind of pinpoint a good place to start, to go to, whatever, which direction, you get to the lake and it's like anything. And so we use that to narrow it down a little bit, right? And along with our ideas of mapping and all that. So when we would kind of narrow in on where that school was coming through, whether they were like hanging around or moving, then what we would do is drill a whole bunch of holes and use the flasher. And honestly, I don't know if this is how everyone does it, but because in my opinion, if you sit and stare at that forward-facing sonar, you are just going to end up staring at it all day like it is a TV screen. There's always something to watch. There's always fish moving through. And if there's not, then to move, right? You're always busy. And so same is true, I guess, with the flasher, but I feel more effective as far as connecting with fish. Like I'm less distracted by the other things going on. I don't know. Maybe I feel like I have a better view. I don't know.
I think the forward-facing sonar. I mean, I think everybody's gonna have their own pros and cons, just with how you fish. And so for me, especially on a day like last weekend where it was pretty cold outside, and not so much that it was uncomfortable to me, but it was more so like not conducive to fishing
The holes were all
outside.
freezing.
And so I had to have the shack flipped over. And because both Emily and I decided instead of a 2-man shack, we would rather have 2 1-mans, just so we could, fish in different areas. I just don't feel like that forward-facing sonar affords me enough room, the amount of room that I want in my shack while I'm fishing. So I just, we, like she said, we drilled 3 holes. I put the sonar down, looked around, and said, okay, well, pick one of these holes. And then she picked one because there was fish just like school here, school here, school here. Like they're just like roaming around. So there was not really any reason to have the forward facing down because they were moving. And the more you moved, the more they would move. So it's better just in that situation, I feel like just to hunker down, if we got really serious, we could have put like a set line down in one corner of the shack, jigged with another one. Probably could have pulled a few more bites. Maybe that's why we didn't get some of the bigger fish, is because it was too much movement. And sometimes the bigger fish like that steady presentation. But we were just catching enough fish that it just didn't really matter that much. So we just didn't put that much effort into it as far as that kind of hole placement. But I think the camera had its place in our strategy last weekend. I think just giving you the exact species that you were targeting, I think really helps narrow down your jig and your plastic selection.
Okay, wait, and let's talk about that, because there's some people out there that are like multi-species, and they're like, I don't care if the fish is biting,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
that's
catch
true.
it. You know, and first of all, that is cool, and you go for that. All right. But I think one of the things for us is in this body of water, there's bass. And honestly, the bass are all right. They're like all right bass. And I don't know. I mean, maybe there's some really great ones in there, right? But that's not what I'm targeting. And I don't know. They're only so exciting. That's my opinion, I guess. And so when I'm looking though, like a mediocre bass and like a pretty decent crappie, I mean, like honestly, the size of how they mark on the forward facing sonar is a little bit similar. And so they kind of do different things, right? As you're watching that graph, you can kind of make some assumptions, but that's the thing, is it is an assumption. And so when you do have, especially your shack set up or when you're hole hopping, if you can have that camera with you and distinguish exactly what those fish are, that's going to make a huge difference. Because in this case, I mean, we spent all this time talking about like fishing and what we did and then our weekend. Great. Almost all bluegills. We never even mentioned that until like right now. You did mention the pike that bit you off, right? And there was, I think, a few bass during the day. But if we were really bent on like finding crappies, like this is what we're doing, the camera is what would have told us to like move on, because we had marks coming through all day, all day, all day. And that was so cool, especially being, oh, a multi-species bite. You know, I just have to keep catching them until a crappie shows up. But sometimes that's true. You know, sometimes you just have to weed through enough fish and you'll catch, you know, a perch and a crappie and a whole, I don't know, whoever knows what else is in there, right? But when you have that camera, you can narrow that down. And so for us, I don't know, on that day, it wasn't really super important, but some days it might be.
Right. Yeah. If you're really looking species specific, you know, the camera is the way to go. Like you can't really beat the aquaview as far as knowing exactly what you're fishing, exactly what type of structure you're fishing, whether it's soft bottom or hard bottom or trees or you know, that kind of detail you can get, like Emily said, you can infer from the forward facing sonar, right? You can be confident like 80%, 70, 80% sure of something. But if you wanted to bet on it, are you willing to bet that 70% on, you know, $10 on somebody that maybe uses it every day? Maybe they would. Weekend warrior, I'm not going to bet $10 unless I have my aquaview that I can tell you that's a bass. So I really do think that the camera is really important, especially for us, just to know, you know, if we're like, oh, we caught a bunch of bluegills, has there been any crappies all day? No, we want to move on to crappies. Let's go find something else. Plus it helps us use the forward facing sonar better, right? Because it really does tell us exactly what the forward facing sonar is showing. So the more we use them together, the better confidence we can get in saying, this is what the forward facing sonar is showing us. And then we can always have that verification, right? And I really do think like there's something to be said about watching baits on a camera versus a forward facing sonar. Cause I've said, you know, in a few episodes back, like, you know, it's nice with the forward facing sonar. You can see how they're reacting to baits and stuff. But I really do think in the past couple outings, seeing fish on the sonar and being able to jig at them a little bit, and it's like, oh man, they're shying away from it. Like they come up to it and then they just shy away, and then you put the camera down and you're like jigging, and it's actually a strike, and then they go away, and so it's like, oh, maybe I was misinterpreting that a little bit.
Or watching the screen instead. Because the thing is, okay, that's a good point. Yeah. Like some of our bites this year, we have not had yet a day where those fish crush it. You know, I have not really, maybe like a fish or two, but every single fish that I've caught this ice season so far has been like a light, delicate bite. And some of them I've gotten lucky. Some of them I've had to really watch for that, right? But sometimes if you're distracted even for 1 second, you take your eyeballs off your rod for 1 second. I don't care how good of a rod you had. We have great rods. It's just occasionally those fish nibble so light.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I probably would have pulled up as many fish as I have so far this season had it not been for the panhandler, just because you could lift up on the rod and see the spring bobber load up. Whereas, with maybe something else that doesn't have like a good spring bobber setup like that, that's specific, you wouldn't be able to see that difference. But yeah, we haven't really had like a super, like, I'm just gonna eat it and fly away with it. Which is fine. That it is what it is. And we're getting into the late part of the winter. And it seems like, I was thinking about this.
Is it the late part of the winter?
Well, I mean, midwinter,
I'm not ready for that either. It's the beginning of ice season still, right?
But I think, this is one of those times when you and I are going to disagree with a lot of anglers. A lot of people are like, oh, first ice. And it's like, for us, that's like, well, that's a late fall bite, right? That's like, the good fall bite is already kind of subsided by then. And then you're like, oh, first ice. And you're like, well, that's just because, maybe you could get out to spots that you couldn't, or whatever, what have you. Maybe some of the species turn on, walleyes or whatever, the water cools down a little bit, they come up shallow. But for us, I feel like we really coming into our own towards mid-January into February. We start hitting a lot of our panfish. They get into these good patterns. And I think that's just coming up for us here. So I'm always excited for some of the days coming up. Look at your face.
I just thought it was a weird breakdown of what your season seemed to be. I was just listening.
Well, I mean, the reason I'm saying that is because a lot of people say that they have a hard time catching panfish between July and August. And that's like when we crush panfish during that time. That's essential.
Those people should listen to those podcasts from that time, because this is not that.
I'm just saying. That's why I was thinking that. This is the winter version of that. This is like, we're getting into like the dog days of winter here. And, the fish are like pushed out deep, or they're floating around like suspended. And that's where we just really, I don't know, we have a fun time fishing those fish. Sorry, I'm trying to give you kudos and I'm getting blasted here. All right, here we go. We got a couple.
Okay, Troy's asking about line choice, and this is a good question here, and partially because I'm in the process of switching my line, because I will be honest, in the past, I've tried one of everything. Like, not really on purpose. I just was looking for something that was gonna work for me. I don't know. We fish out in the elements. Like, we have striker gear. That sounds so like snarky. But what I mean is, like, we often talk about that being like your shack that's on your body, right? Okay. And obviously we still do use shacks. Sometimes you got to cut the wind or a few other things. But when you are able to be warm enough, like in your suit, you're hopping around, you're moving around. The one thing that we find that cannot keep up is the freezing line. Like in the eyelets, like freezing, I guess. But when, you can kind of flick the ice off the eyelets and move down a little bit quicker. But when you start getting all of that line freeze, it starts to be a pain. And I'm just at a point where I'm done dealing with that. And so we're switching.
Yeah, we are. We talking to a lot of people in our circle. And yeah, I think we're gonna be switching over, kind of getting away from the
fins. To the fins,
yeah,
because they have. Well, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Get to it. It sounds
I was just trying to think for it. No, I was just saying we're getting away from the monofilament, like the fluorocarbon. We're trying to get away. We're getting away from the polymer line, is what I was trying to get to.
That's the problem, is I have like one of everything on all my ice rods. It's like a conglomerate of like colors of line and types. And
well, you got like things. A cat ball of rods in the garage right now.
That's the problem is because I have gotten frustrated with the rods are great, the reels are great, and if you have garbage line on there, if you have it's not working for me. It's not. And so
yeah, I think
exactly where we're at.
Yeah, we're moving. We're moving over to the 4-pound fins ice tamer. I've actually so it has like I think it's a listed 8-pound breaking strength or something, but in my experience, a lot of times that's understated with breaking strength. And so I I'm just running 4 pound on everything. My walleye rods and my panfish rods. I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know if anybody's ever gonna get me away from my head tennis swivels, because I just love that. It keeps the line twists off the little swirly bluegills and stuff.
Well, and you say high ten, I'm not because we're sponsored by them, because
No,
we're not even, but because they offer like the smallest little tiny
the
swivels.
smallest swivel I can find. So nobody, I don't know if anybody can get me out of my leader game. A lot of people talk about the more moving parts you have, the more knots you have in your system, the more apt you are to break it. Well, I don't know. I catch plenty of fish to make myself happy, so I just feel like I'm going to continue with my set there. But I will say that I have had the Finn's 4-pound braided ice tamer line. That's right? The ice tamer. So the ice line I've had on my walleye rods, and we've got to use them a few times out ice fishing, for walleyes and stuff in the cold. And I will say, the ice buildup has been a lot less on that line.
And that's what's made me put other rods in a pile in the garage to switch out, because now I see how annoying it is. Tobin, you though are hitting something on nail on the head that I'm interested in. Inline Reel does a great job on line twist. Hey, you are right, and I'm not here to combat that. But here's my deal. I have the Carbon ICX. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay. So anyways, and I do like it. It is a pretty decent reel. Here's the thing. I cannot get that bait to fall quite fast enough for me. And so then I'm that person, I'm like, a fish is down there. And I start like ripping the line out. And if you pull too fast, you're just gonna like spool it. You know what I'm talking about. If you do, this has happened to you. This is terrible, right? Because then you have to like take that little knob off. You have to like fix it all. Then you like miss the fish for sure. All of this, right? This is what happens. And so then you got to put it back together. Okay, that little knob on mine, one time it must have gotten like mistwisted, because now I have to like line it up like perfectly and like it's like, okay, it's just probably a personal problem. I don't mean to go down the rabbit hole. It's my half working reel, but this is my problem with the inline reels, is I want something that falls a little bit faster, but when you do, you have that issue with that line. What do you call it? Back spooling
on the
whatever.
Backlash.
Yeah. And it just, maybe I'm too impatient for an inline reel, but all of my open face, then you can just like open the bail. You can throw all that line down there. I know it sounds ridiculous. It does, but sometimes you've got to get to that fish, right? Because we're talking about fishing fish when they're like moving around. That was where we started all of this, right? And so when the fish are there, if you have bait, you keep them occupied, you keep catching a fish, right? But then when all of a sudden, first of all, then you get your line like going backwards on your reel, and then you like miss the fish, but then they're gone, and then you have a reel to fix, and it's all a disaster.
And then you hear, son of a...
I'm like, oh my God.
As long as we don't hear any bloosh, then we're fine. Then we're fine.
No.
We're okay. No, I totally agree with you, Tobin. I love my inline reels, but I still find, especially when you get into water that's a little bit deeper than 50, you're fishing that 15 to 30 feet, 15 to 28 feet. You're catching bluegills. You still get, they're spinning in the hole, and you're reeling that up even on a straight line inline reel. You're reeling that twist up as they're doing it. And so that my little swivel, it's not for everybody. I understand, but my little swivel, really prevents a lot of that. And for me, it keeps my line a lot more usable, especially the braid, for a lot longer, because it prevents that twist. So I'm all about it. So I will more than happy point you in the direction of the swivels that I use. If you ask me, just shoot Crappie Junction a message, or shoot me personally a message, and I'll sing all the praises of my swivels. But that's for another episode.
And 15 past episodes.
Troy, he's asking, how long of a leader do you use from the swivel to the jig? So that's kind of dependent Troy, I think for me, I always go with kind of in our water, I start out with 3 feet and I end up with about a foot, and it doesn't really seem to, I don't know, doesn't really seem to affect the fish that much, for me.
It does
I,
not
it,
make that big of a difference
I
because I will tell you, I don't want to say I'm lazy at switching it, but like if it's not chewed on, if it's not stretched up, if it's not, I don't know if it's in good condition, I just every time I cut and change my jig, and so then it gets shorter and shorter, and then sometimes I'm like, okay, this is pathetic, right?
but
But it's you do you.
but here's a really good way to set your swivel and your leader. So if you take and you run enough leader to go from your second eyelet on your rod to your hook keeper, that's enough. So when it's reeled up, when your hook is in your hook keeper and
I don't
your
have time to
leader,
measure that. I'm on the ice and there's fish down there.
we already know about how impatient you are about putting your line in. Maybe
I
you should
like
run
take
2
this
lines
line and
all
I'm
the
like,
time.
I do that and I'm like, perfect. And
Yeah, but
cut
I
it.
mean you develop like how much you kind of need when you
No,
start
how
doing.
long is my arm?
Which,
That's it.
well, then you have a perfect arm for your rods apparently. But where I'm going with that is that when you're reeling up, where your hook keeper is almost like, and you can bring that into open water, because for open water I find that tip, if you put your swivel about your second eyelet to your hook keeper, that's a perfect casting distance. So when you naturally reel up, you'll have about 4 inches of line or 3 inches of line hanging out past your swivel, so you don't ever have to reel that swivel into your guides, and then you just automatically cast it. And so it goes the same thing for ice rods, and I'm not casting the ice rods, but what I'm preventing is the swivel getting sucked in when there's ice on the guides. And then that is more of like I'm preventing my ice rods from breaking, because I'm reeling up and then my guide is getting all froze up, and then I hit the swivel and it curls the tip of my rod down. I don't want that. I want to keep that swivel out of my guides as much as possible. So that's just how I do it. I don't know. Emily just measures her arm and she just says, hell with it. Send it. Full send.
Okay. Yes. But I do like what you're saying though about not sucking the swivel into the eyelets. Because number one, getting them back out is kind of a pain. Like we've all sucked our jig all the way up and it just gets like rattled around in there. You have to pull it all out, right? But the thing is, when you have swivels, they're metal. So when you have the metal running against the metal eyelets and it just continuously runs up against it, sometimes it'll scratch it or nick it. I mean, this is over time, and this is tiny, tiny little things. You probably won't notice it, but that's the thing, is especially in those eyelets. And same thing, this is why you don't want to hook your hook, like your jig or your hook, to the eyelet, because especially the hook is so sharp. I know that sounds dumb. It's a perfect thing that will scratch, tiny little scratches on those eyelets. And honestly, after time, that will eat away at your line. And so especially if you're the kind of person and you're using braid, and then like after a little while, maybe it does start to fray a little bit, or you can see, I don't know. But if you are noticing that, like check your eyelets, because if it is nicked up like that, you do not want it have the opportunity to like snag or cut the line. And that sounds extreme, but it is actually, it's happened. It's something that can happen.
Yeah. And if your rod doesn't have a hook keeper towards the handle of the rod, just hook your hook, instead of on the inside of the eyelet, just hook it on one of the eyelet supports that connects the eyelet to the rod, the little feet there. Just hook it there. Try to use the top portion of it, because like Emily said, that'll prevent the damage to the interior of your eyelets. And that hopefully will save some of your line for the long run.
Your rod. I don't care. The line will need to be switched anyways. I'm not worried about my rod. Because that's the thing is, I mean, we know how to switch out eyelets or whatever, make rods, but most people don't or can't, or like the time or the tools or any of those things. And to take it in somewhere to get fixed or repair, it's like, oh my gosh, it's just like, get a new rod. But that's ridiculous for an eyelet. I don't know, but that's the thing. That's why it's important, And I guess that's really when I see people like throw their rods into a bucket and it's like, you be you. If you do that, you keep doing that, go for it. But that's the thing is like, all those things start to affect your gear. And we're talking earlier in the show about how delicate of a bite that it is, right? How much you have to watch your gear, how much you have to depend on your gear. A lot of that starts at, line that's in good working condition and not frozen up, and a rod that's not too banged up to where, I mean, these all sound like super obvious things, but honestly I guess that's why the rod cases that we use are like so important.
Okay,
you're still online. Here we go.
So Emily's talking about line, and I just figured I'd share this quick. So this is kind of what we've been switching over to this season. The 4 pound, so there's 4, 6, 8, 20, 30. I don't know what you'd be fishing with even 20 or 30. Maybe 30 pound would be pretty good for tip ups, maybe. If you're into that, I think I would still fish lake trout with 20. That probably has a breaking strength somewhere in that 30, 40 pound range. If you're, you have to think of a fish being weighs half as much as its reality in the water. So a 40 pound breaking strength would be an 80 pound fish that you would have to. I don't know. I don't catch bluegills that big. If you guys catch bluegills that big, more power to you. But 4 pound test has like a 8, 9 pound breaking strength. That's perfect for pretty much anything I'm gonna catch. And it has a 1 pound diameter, maybe even a little bit less than that. And so I know a lot of the guys that have kind of turned us on to this have been using the black tied directly to their jigs. They've been having a lot of success. I really like high vis. That's kind of my jam. Some of the folks over in the western part of the ice belt might like some of the green a little bit more, just because they have a little bit more stained up water. It adds a little bit more algae in it. It might camouflage a little bit better. Black's always a great choice. Black is the best overall camouflage color of all. It's just a shadow. So I think, for us, we've kind of gone with the black and the yellow for different applications. But like I said, it's going to be 4 pound fins ice tamer on all of my stuff. Walleye, pike, panfish. It's going to be 4 pound across the board for me.
Tobin is asking, how well do you think it works in clear water? I mean, I think that's totally, well, first of all, I've heard really great. We don't have water that's super clear, I guess.
We do. Yeah, Pelican Lake, Enterprise Lake. I think any of these bigger bodies of water that we have by us have a lot of rock in it, and so it during the summertime it's a little bit tannic, so it's a little bit more brown. But during the wintertime, when the tannins stop flowing in, that water really does clear up. And honestly, I think especially once you get a little bit of snow on top of the ice, I think the black is money for clear water.
I was gonna say, I've heard good things about the black, but that goes all the way back to when you were talking about having a leader, right? Because if you are concerned at all, you have that option to always tip it with anything clear or whatever. That's
well, and you don't necessarily have. One of the things with the ice tamer, one of the things with the fin line in general, it's not as slippery. Like it doesn't. I don't know why it's like that, but it doesn't slip as bad when you're trying to tie knots. So this would be a perfect application if you're not a swivel person. If you want to tie like uni knots direct, like this would be a good application for that, Tobin. If you really wanted to have, you could have like a 10-foot leader if you wanted to, and just tie it direct on there with a uni knot, and then I think you would be fine. That being said, 10-foot leader, I think another thing that I was thinking of, kind of lost track now and coming back to, is that it comes in packs of like 150 yards. Okay, you don't need to put a whole spool on one rod. I think that I think there's something to be said about putting in like a little bit of tape on the inside of your reel or on the inside of your spool, and then just putting like 50 yards on. I don't even remember the last time that I had a fish spool me 50 yards. Like 50 yards is a half of a football field. Like, when's the last time a fish has done that to you? So I mean, like, you could get three
I want a little bit
reels.
more line on
I don't put any more line on there, and I do just fine. So you definitely an opinion. But if you want to make your line go a little bit further, I really do think you could get 3 ice reels out of a pack, one pack of this stuff, and you would do perfectly fine. And if you really want to keep that the line pickup ratio, like I said, I like, for me, I like that silicone tape where it only sticks to itself. I use that for putting some of my handles on, but I also use that on the inside of the reel. It's squishy enough so it gives grab, but you can build it up a little bit so that you can keep that line pickup ratio like it's a full spool, but only put like 50 yards or 60 yards on it, and it works great. So do we want to keep this up? Do we? I just wanted to show you guys.
I feel like honestly, we are gonna talk to them at some point. So like,
yeah,
some of these line questions, like, hang tight, because I mean,
we should have them.
answer
Yeah,
them,
we'll
right. But we've talked to them actually at the Wisconsin Ice Fishing Expo, which was so fun. That was a really great connection. And actually talk about a place that people were buying up Finn's line. I feel like a bunch of the retailers had it, and I feel like it was something that almost everybody was going home with, because, well, there was actually a lot of line or rods bought, and I guess gifted from the expo, from the giveaway gang. And so that was that was a whole bunch of fun though. So I guess as far as ice season, what else do we talk about?
Ice season. I don't know. I think when you're going into this time of year, if you're focusing on panfish, just remember when you're having, if you're marking fish and you're having a tough time, remember that jigs can be important. So try different profiles of jigs along with trying different plastics. So if you're getting looks with a certain plastic but you're not getting commitments, maybe keep the plastic you're using, try a different jig. Or if like, same thing goes for live bait. If you're getting lots of looks or short strikes on live bait, try a different, jig presentation, because you have jigs that sit 90 degrees, you have jigs that sit 45, you have jigs that sit, the whole 180. And it's definitely worth trying a different one, a different angle of approach when it comes to that kind of stuff. And I wasn't that much of a believer in that. I was always like a horizontal fisherman for the longest time, and I really do think there's something to that. What do they call it? Vertical presentation, where you have a vertical hook with a horizontal, kind of like drop shot style hookup thing. There's something to that. There's all kinds of stuff. So just don't feel defeated. Just feel determined when you're trying stuff. Just keep switching. And don't be afraid to go small. I know a lot of people out there have really glommed onto like the 5 millimeters and the 4 millimeters. And it's like, let's get down there fast. And it reads really well, but there's something to be said about, just going down really small, getting into that 3 millimeter size, or maybe even going to some of your small lead stuff. And it's okay. It can float down there. Let it float down there, because all that water that jig's falling through super slow, there's fish swimming around.
There is not always.
Yeah.
There is not always.
And there isn't always, but you never know. And sometimes it'll be like 5 feet under the water sinking, and then a fish will pop up, and then your line stops sinking, and you're like, oh, and then you figure something else out. Like, that's happened to me before. So just remember, and if you have a really fast bite, put a heavier jig on. Get down there faster, because those fish don't really seem to care that much. So just like cannonball that thing down there. But if it's hard, just make sure that you use everything that you have in your tackle box. That's why you have it in your tackle box, is to use it.
Well, and it's almost funny that that's kind of what you brought up when I asked you such a generic question, because the only other thing that I was thinking about talking about this show is kind of a shout out to the ice shack, and not just like keeping you warm or anything like that. But I think this year has really been a game of detecting the bite. Like I said, those small bites. And there have been days that if I was outside not jigging with a shack, that the wind would be too intense to detect that bite. Like, I don't care what kind of rod you have, the wind would be knocking your rod around that you would never be able to see that tiny little bite. And so I think that's coming back to also what you're saying, because, you know, that's evidence of using that small jig, right? When you have a heavy jig and it's like weighing it down or whatever, oh, now the wind won't bother it, you know, but you might be missing those bites. And so this year has really been, I guess, kind of putting together that puzzle of like the right jig at the right size, at the right fall rate, in order to get those bites, like you're saying. But ultimately that wind, I feel like, man, for the last year, that's all we've been talking about is wind.
Excellent point, Emily.
Yeah, but I think honestly, like, well, I just the wind, we just have to deal with it every time. And so, you know, there's options for tip ups, you know, how you said those. There's different options for whatever. But I think so often people miss the fact that like shacks are a tool and not just like a luxury.
Yeah, no, that's definitely right. And even if you just use it as a windbreak, you know, I know a lot of people use it as a sled to carry their stuff out, and then you end up just like sitting out, you know, kneeling on the ice, you know, trying to hole hop. But don't forget, you have the shelter there. Put it up, use it as a windbreak. I'm one of those people that forget that all the time. I drag that shack out there and the cover never comes off of it, and then I'm complaining to Emily like, oh man, it was so windy and I couldn't barely get it. My
and
line
I'm like,
was
I had no problem.
And so, you know, I that's a constant battle for me. I'm getting better at it, you know, and I think once you just start utilizing your tools, I think you'll be more successful. Yeah, holy smokes, 42 minutes. Okay. So I guess the last thing was so I'm trying to think of how to jump into this. So we're talking about all different kinds of presentations for panfish, upsizing, downsizing, this and that. Today, if you check out the stories on our Facebook page, I actually had the day off because unfortunately President Jimmy Carter passed away a couple weeks ago. They had his funeral today. My work observed the federal observance of him. So I went fishing without Emily. Bum, bum, bum. And so my coworkers kind of called me this morning and said, hey, do you want to go watch some tip-ups? And I said, sure. I didn't know that we were doing tip-ups for perch. So we went out there and we did some perch tip-ups. And that was pretty fun. So, you know, we just set it kind of pretty much the same as walleyes, just a little bit smaller presentation. But I think that's another thing, you know, if you don't overlook something like a tip up for a panfish presentation. I know our friend Pat Kelmerton has some really good tips, has done some stuff with perch fishing with tip ups, you know, doing kind of a double hanger rig on a tip up and stuff. So you might be able to find that over on one of his pages. But yeah, just you know, check out the story. We did a bunch of fishing today, and you know, I just got home. That's why I'm still in my ice fishing stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to put that in there. Check out tip ups with the panfish because that could be pretty fun too.
Whatever, you left me out.
I left you out.
What else?
No, I don't know. That's it. I just wanted to put that quick in there.
Well, that is most of what we plan to talk about today.
We didn't plan about talking about any of that.
Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't look impressed. Yeah, I was stuck at work, and then he was like, "I'm going fishing. Do you want pictures or not?" And I'm like, that was my reaction to all of it.
She did. She went.
Yeah, that's how I felt. It's like,
I'm sorry.
You've had more days off in the last 2 months than anybody I've known. I'm not even excited for you. Out of all people in the world,
I never said anybody needed to be excited. I was just trying to.
But Matt pointed out that I didn't look thrilled. I was like,
whatever. You get to work with fish every day. every single day. Oh, poor Emily. She has to go and talk about people's biggest fish that they caught every day.
Anyways,
So, anyways.
anyways, that's all the show that we had planned. And it's always a ton of fun to be here and talk with you guys and all of that. So thank you to everybody who's here with us this evening.
Yeah,
and I guess with that, we're looking forward to seeing everyone on next week's edition of The Night Bite.
Have a good weekend. Good night.